Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about a neighbor who demanded access to my house. I'll never forget that sweltering summer afternoon when everything changed. I had just finished my early morning coffee on the back porch, savoring the quiet and the promise of a bright day, when I noticed a car slowly roll up the long, winding driveway. At first I assumed it was one of my neighbors, but as the vehicle parked and a woman with perfectly coiffed hair and an unmistakable air of entitlement stepped out, I knew something was off. Her name was Karen, at least that's how I'd come to know her, and she came bearing a demand that would set off a chain of events altering the course of my life. "I need the keys to your house," she declared in a tone that brooked no argument. "It's time we verified that you're complying with the color guidelines for the renovations." I stared at her in disbelief. I had spent weeks planning my home repair project, hiring a reliable contractor and selecting exactly the hue I'd grown to love, a warm, inviting terracotta that somehow evoked both tradition and modern style. For the life of me, I couldn't recall receiving any so-called recommendations from the Homeowners Association, HOA. Instead, I'd been left to my own devices, armed with nothing more than a vague promise of community improvement and some seemingly arbitrary guidelines that made little sense. I was about to learn the hard way how far some people would go in their misguided quest for control. At first, I thought Karen's visit was some sort of error. After all, I'd never been contacted, written to, or even mentioned that my project was under any sort of scrutiny. "I'm sorry," I said slowly, trying to maintain a calm composure while my mind raced. "I haven't received any guidelines, and as far as I'm aware, I'm free to choose the colors for my renovation." Karen's eyes narrowed as she clutched a thick folder containing printed copies of what she claimed were the official guidelines distributed to every homeowner in the community. "These aren't suggestions," she insisted sharply. "They are mandates, and you are required by your HOA agreement to adhere to them. Now hand me your keys so I can ensure your property meets the standards." I felt a surge of indignation. The very idea of handing over my keys to some self-appointed enforcer of aesthetics was absurd, if not an outright violation of my rights. "Karen," I said firmly, "I own this house, and no one is going to dictate every brushstroke I choose to apply. The guidelines, if they exist, should have been communicated to me officially, not thrust in my hand without my prior knowledge." Karen's expression hardened, and I could see that she was ready for a confrontation. I never imagined that a simple discussion over my house's color scheme would evolve into one of the most defining moments of my life. A moment that not only tested my resolve, but also galvanized my commitment to protect my property rights. Little did I know, Karen's intrusion was only the opening salvo in a drawn-out battle against an overbearing system that had long overstepped its bounds. After our terse exchange on the porch, I retreated inside, my heart pounding and my mind churning with the shock of what had just transpired. I couldn't believe that someone from the HOA would take it upon herself to enforce guidelines in such an invasive manner. I grabbed my laptop and began searching through my email and physical mail for any sign of the dreaded guidelines. But every scrap of correspondence confirmed that I was completely in the dark. It seemed that while others had been duped by the HOA's recommendations, I had been left out entirely. I decided that I needed clarity and a plan, one that would not only safeguard my rights, but also expose the absurdity of the whole situation. I reached out to my friend Marcus, who was known in our small community for his legal acumen and no-nonsense attitude when it came to protecting individual freedoms. We arranged to meet at his modest home office, surrounded by shelves of legal texts and a well-thumbed copy of our town's municipal regulations. Marcus listened intently as I recounted the episode in vivid detail. "This is a classic case of overreach," he said, frowning as he flipped through the HOA bylaws that I had managed to find online. "Legally speaking, if you never received those guidelines in the proper format, then they're not enforceable. Karen's demand for your keys is, at best, an intrusive power play, and at worst, a clear violation of your property rights." His words struck a chord, and I felt a sense of solidarity welling up inside me. Here was a man who truly believed in the principles of fairness and the sanctity of personal space. With Marcus's encouragement, I resolved to stand my ground. I composed a formal letter to the HOA, clearly outlining the absurdity of Karen's demand and my refusal to surrender control of my own property. I demanded that they provide the official guidelines and a clear explanation of their legal authority over my renovation project. Even as I typed out the letter, I could feel a surge of defiance, the kind that comes from knowing you're in the right. That very evening, I posted my experience on a local community forum, where many of my neighbors had quietly been complaining about the undue influence of the HOA. I described the encounter, quoted Marcus's legal insights, and called for transparency and accountability from our neighborhood board. The response was immediate and overwhelming. It turned out I was not alone in my disdain. Several residents stepped forward with similar stories of intrusive inspections, last-minute fines, and even attempts by the HOA to dictate other seemingly mundane aspects of their lives. One name came up repeatedly: Diane, a longtime resident known for her quiet resilience and willingness to stand up for her rights. I arranged to meet her for a coffee at a small downtown cafe. Diane recounted how Karen, who wasn't the only authoritarian figure in the HOA, had once tried to force her into repainting her entire fence because it didn't match the approved color palette. "They're trying to create a cookie-cutter neighborhood out of a diverse community," Diane explained, her eyes flashing with indignation. "But you know what? Enough is enough." Our conversation fueled my determination to push back even harder. I decided to gather every shred of evidence I could find: printed copies of the alleged guidelines, records of all my previous communications with the HOA, and testimonies from other residents who had experienced similar harassment. I reached out to a local journalist, someone I knew had a knack for digging up the truth behind local controversies, and shared my findings. The journalist, whose name was Trevor, was intrigued. He agreed to look into the matter, promising that if there was an injustice unfolding right before our eyes, it would not go unreported. My correspondence with Trevor soon blossomed into a full-fledged investigation. I was interviewed by him for a lengthy piece detailing the HOA's heavy-handed tactics and the arbitrary nature of their so-called guidelines. The article, published a week later in a popular local news outlet, cast a stark light on the coercive practices employed by our neighborhood board. Karen's face and her aggressive demeanor became a symbol of tyranny, and soon calls for a town meeting were flooding in from disgruntled homeowners. A month later, on a chilly evening in early fall, the community gathered in the town hall for a meeting that promised to be nothing short of explosive. I took my place among a diverse group of residents, each fueled by similar grievances and a desire for change. The atmosphere was electric, a palpable mix of hope and outrage. At the front of the room, the HOA board members sat arranged in a semicircle, their expressions ranging from defensive to downright weary. Karen, now unmistakably the leading enforcer, was stationed at the center of the board. I watched her for a moment, remembering her earlier demand for my keys, and felt a quiet thrill. Here was a group of people who had long wielded their power without accountability, and now the community had gathered to challenge them. When the meeting began, Karen launched into an impassioned defense of the guidelines, citing archaic clauses and insisting on the necessity of uniformity in our beloved neighborhood. "The guidelines are in place to maintain property values and ensure community aesthetics," she proclaimed, her voice reverberating off the tiled walls. "We are all responsible for the overall appearance and harmony of this community." I couldn't hold back any longer. Rising from my seat, I addressed the room in a measured but firm voice. "I respect the idea that our community should look cohesive, but these guidelines were never properly communicated. I have documentation to prove that I never received the official notice. More importantly, no single homeowner should have to hand over their keys for an inspection without prior consent. Our property rights are enshrined in law, and the demands placed upon us by these guidelines have no legal standing if not communicated appropriately." A murmur ran through the crowd, and several voices echoed my sentiment. One by one, other residents came forward to share their experiences. There was Carl, who had been threatened with fines for not following a similar yet entirely different guideline regarding the type of shrubs he planted, and Mia, who had faced harassment for refusing to change the color of her front door, a color she chose after careful deliberation and personal attachment. Each story painted a picture of an HOA that had morphed from a group of community advocates into an authoritarian regime, imposing arbitrary rules on private citizens. As the meeting progressed, the HOA board's arguments began to falter under the weight of the collective dissent. The evidence amassed by residents, combined with legal insights provided by Marcus, who had joined the meeting at my side, proved overwhelming. Karen's face reddened with frustration as her carefully constructed narrative unraveled in real time. After hours of heated debate and legal clarifications, the meeting ended with a unanimous call for an independent review of the HOA's practices. Over the following weeks, the pressure mounted. A local attorney, impressed by the collective outcry and the clear violation of property rights, took on the case pro bono. I worked closely with him, providing every scrap of evidence and every testimonial I could muster from the embattled homeowners. The legal battle was grueling, filled with lengthy depositions, endless rounds of documentation, and persistent cross-examinations. But we were motivated by a shared sense of justice. One of the most damning revelations came during a lengthy court session when it was uncovered that the alleged guidelines had been distributed in a manner that flagrantly violated the HOA's own bylaws. It appeared that a miscommunication, or perhaps a deliberate oversight, had led to many homeowners not receiving the official document at all. This oversight meant that any attempt to enforce such guidelines was legally suspect at best and an infringement of our rights at worst. The courtroom became a battleground for principles that resonated far beyond our quiet neighborhood. I spoke passionately about the importance of personal freedom and the right to determine the character of one's own property. My voice, along with that of many others who had been similarly aggrieved, filled the halls of justice with the resounding call for accountability. Karen, once so confident and assertive in her role, soon found herself on the defensive. The judge, recognizing the serious overreach committed by the HOA board, ordered a temporary injunction that halted all enforcement of the disputed guidelines while the case was thoroughly investigated. In the weeks that followed, as evidence continued to mount against the HOA board, the legal repercussions became unavoidable. An independent audit was commissioned, and the findings were damning. The HOA had not only failed to communicate essential guidelines properly, but it had also engaged in practices that infringed on the constitutional rights of homeowners. Karen, whose aggressive tactics had served as a focal point for our grievances, was fined a substantial sum and forced to undergo community service, a punishment designed to reflect the gravity of her misuse of power and to serve as a deterrent for any future overreach. The legal victory was not just a personal triumph, it marked the beginning of a broader change in our community. Inspired by our success, several other homeowners who had suffered in silence began to step forward. The story of our struggle spread beyond our neighborhood's boundaries, and soon similar cases of HOA overreach emerged in other communities. I received letters and phone calls from people who were emboldened by our victory, each recounting how they had been forced to yield to arbitrary rules that were never clearly communicated or legally justified. One particularly memorable case came from a homeowner named Lila, who was battling an HOA that had attempted to dictate the style of holiday decorations on her property. Lila had always been known for her creative and unconventional flair during the festive season, a quality that brought her both admiration and occasional criticism. But her HOA had taken offense to her use of bright, non-traditional colors and demanded that she conform to a rigid aesthetic. Lila's determination to keep her unique style, much like my own fight for my home's chosen color, resonated deeply with many. Though her case was separate from ours, the underlying issues were starkly similar, a clash between personal expression and an overzealous governing body. Our collective efforts spurred a wave of reform. Not only was the HOA forced to scrap the improper guidelines, but an entirely new committee was established to review any future changes in community policies. This committee was made up of homeowners elected by their peers, individuals who understood the value of personal freedom and the importance of clear, transparent communication. In its first act, the committee issued a revised policy that respected the unique character of each home while still encouraging community cohesion. The new guidelines made it abundantly clear that any changes affecting property appearance would only be recommended in the future, never mandated, and only after proper notice had been given. While our legal victories and policy reforms were cause for celebration, they were not without their unintended consequences. The confrontation with Karen had inadvertently exposed deeper issues within the fabric of our community. For instance, one of my longtime neighbors, Rick, felt that the upheaval had emboldened him to pursue some long-delayed renovations that he had long suppressed out of fear of bureaucratic retribution. Rick's dilapidated barn, which had sat neglected at the edge of his property for years, suddenly became the subject of fierce debate. Some residents felt that the barn, in its once rustic charm, added to the eclectic beauty of the area, while others, influenced by past experiences with the HOA, demanded that it be brought up to standard or removed entirely. Rick, however, saw an opportunity in the chaos. "I'm going to restore that barn," he declared at a neighborhood barbecue that had turned into a lively forum of ideas and aspirations. I've got the design ready, the contractor lined up, and a new sense of freedom. No more will I let arbitrary rules dictate my choices." His determination, echoing our own fight against oppression, sparked a series of projects across the community. Soon, I found myself assisting fellow homeowners with their renovations, sharing legal advice gleaned from my own battle, and even coordinating with local trade experts who had become disillusioned by the old ways of the HOA. At the same time, I was not blind to the fact that change did not come without sacrifice. In the midst of our collective victory, Karen, whose once unassailable pride had crumbled under the weight of accountability, was forced to confront the implications of her actions. During one particularly tense town hall session after the ruling, I noticed Karen in the back of the room, slumped in her chair with a mixture of regret and lingering defiance on her face. Later, as I walked past her privately, I had a brief conversation. "I'm sorry if it feels personal," I told her gently, "but this wasn't about you. It was about a system that has long taken our rights for granted. Maybe this is an opportunity for all of us to learn and grow." Her response was curt, and while I wasn't sure she fully understood, I hoped that this moment might lead her to reconsider her approach in the future. Even as I celebrated our legal and communal victories, the ordeal took its toll on me personally. The stress of confronting an oppressive system, the long hours spent poring over documents and correspondence, and the sleepless nights filled with anxiety over what might come next left me exhausted. There were moments when I questioned if it was all worth it. After all, I had only wanted to update my home, a personal project meant to bring warmth and comfort to my family. Yet, through the turmoil, I had discovered reserves of resilience I never knew I possessed. I began to document my journey in a journal, detailing every conversation, every setback, and every small triumph along the way. In the quiet hours of the night, as I scrawled furiously by the dim light of a desk lamp, I was struck by the realization that this battle was a microcosm of a larger truth, that standing up for one's rights, no matter how personal the issue, could spark meaningful change. My writings, raw and candid, evolved from mere notes into a manifesto of sorts, a call to action for anyone who ever felt oppressed by overbearing authorities. I shared my journal entries with a close-knit group of friends who, in turn, passed on the sentiment. It wasn't long before my personal struggle resonated with a broader audience, inspiring countless individuals in our town and beyond to challenge unfair practices in their own lives. As winter crept into our small community, bringing with it a crisp chill and a sense of renewal, the dust began to settle on our victory. The HOA board, now reformed and subject to strict oversight, could no longer operate with impunity. The independent review that had once seemed like a distant possibility was implemented in full, and the new committee worked tirelessly to ensure that no homeowner would ever again be blindsided by unexpected mandates. I received a formal apology from the board, a gesture that, while small in comparison to the months of hardship, represented a tentative step toward restitution. In a final town hall meeting a few months after the court decision, I stood before the community one last time. This time, not as a lone dissenter, but as part of a united front of homeowners who had reclaimed their rights. I recounted the entire ordeal, from the initial confrontation with Karen to the legal battles, the community meetings, and the bittersweet realization that true change was never easy. "Today," I said, "we stand not only as residents of this neighborhood, but as champions of fairness, of transparency, and of personal freedom. We have shown that when we come together, no matter how oppressive an authority may seem, we have the power to demand justice and to transform our community." The room erupted in applause, and I felt a surge of gratitude for every person who had joined me on this journey. Months later, as spring began to breathe new life into our once dormant neighborhood, I found myself gazing at the exterior of my home. The terracotta finish, which had been the subject of so much controversy, now stood as a proud testament to perseverance and individuality. Neighbors stopped by to compliment the tasteful renovation, and even those who had once sided with the old rules acknowledged the refreshing authenticity of my home's new look. During one leisurely afternoon barbecue in my backyard, I sat with Diane, Rick, and a host of other friends who had fought alongside me. We recounted old stories and laughed over shared memories of a time when our community had been divided by arbitrary rules. But now, unified by the hard-won lesson of standing up for our rights, we looked ahead with hope. Karen had long since faded from our daily conversations, replaced by a renewed commitment among the HOA board to truly represent the interests of the residents. Her punitive measures, imposed by the law and community consensus, had become a cautionary tale for anyone tempted by the allure of unchecked authority. Yet, the aftermath of our struggle was not without its bittersweet elements. I had learned that sometimes the fight for personal freedom can be both exhilarating and exhausting. The countless hours spent in legal wrangling, the sleepless nights filled with anxiety over potential setbacks, and the constant tension that had gripped my every waking moment had left scars. Scars that, over time, would fade into reminders of a battle fought valiantly for the right to live on my own terms. Every time I walked through my front door, I was reminded that my home was mine, and only mine, to shape as I saw fit. Reflecting on these events, I realized that our collective struggle had broader implications. It wasn't merely about the color of a house or the right to renovate as one pleased. It was about reclaiming the inherent dignity of homeownership in a society where personal expression and freedom could easily be stifled by faceless bureaucracies. The legal victory was more than a win for me. It was a win for all of us who had ever felt belittled by systems that claimed to have our best interests at heart. The lessons from this experience have stayed with me ever since. I now approach life with a heightened sense of awareness and an unyielding commitment to safeguarding my rights and those of my neighbors. My journey has taught me that no matter how imposing an institution might appear, a determined community backed by the principles of justice and fairness can always challenge and change even the most deeply entrenched norms. As I pen these words, I am filled with a sense of cautious optimism. The battle that began with a single demand from Karen, "I need the keys to your house," has blossomed into a movement that continues to echo through our community. Every brushstroke on my once plain exterior is a symbol not of defiance against the law, but of the vibrant spirit that refuses to be tamed by outdated edicts. I remember the endless hours in heated discussion with Marcus, the supportive nods from Diane, and even Rick's triumphant announcement of restoring his barn. Each memory is a reminder of how essential it is to remain true to oneself amidst external pressures. I now know that the integrity of our personal spaces must be defended against any overreach, no matter how well-intentioned it may seem. The legal system, in its wisdom, reaffirmed that our homes are our sanctuaries, a place where personal expression must never be sacrificed at the altar of conformity. This realization has transformed my perspective. I no longer see regulations as mere guidelines, but as lines that must be respected while ensuring that individual liberties are never compromised. In the aftermath of the confrontation, I've also come to appreciate the importance of community. There was a time when I felt isolated in my struggle, alone against a seemingly monolithic HOA. But in reaching out, I discovered that many of my neighbors had similar experiences, and together our voices were far stronger than any single mandate. The camaraderie that developed, evidenced by open dialogue and mutual support at our town hall meetings, has laid the foundation for a more resilient and cooperative neighborhood, one where the rights and uniqueness of each resident are honored above all else. Although the legal case is now a closed chapter in my life, its ripples continue to influence our community's future. The new HOA policies are more transparent, and regular town meetings have become a forum for constructive dialogue rather than a stage for dictatorial pronouncements. We've come to understand that true progress is built on collaboration, respect, and above all, the recognition that every homeowner's voice matters. I still get the occasional visit from former members of the old board, people who used to endorse invasive inspections and petty rules. And while the conversations are polite, it is clear that times have changed. Their outdated views no longer hold sway over the majority, and many have either retired or stepped aside, making way for a more inclusive leadership that values reason over rigid control. As I look back on that fateful day, the day when Karen demanded my keys, I realized that it was the spark that ignited a much larger fire, a fire of resistance, accountability, and ultimately, renewal. Every challenge I faced, every moment of self-doubt was met with unwavering support from a community that refused to be silenced. The experience taught me that the true measure of a community is not in its conformity, but in its capacity for growth, compassion, and justice. In the months following the resolution, I continued with my renovations, albeit with a newfound sense of purpose. My home, proudly painted in that unique terracotta shade, stands as a testament to the power of standing up for one's beliefs. Neighbors stop by not just to compliment the color, but to ask about the story behind it, how a simple refusal to follow an arbitrary guideline evolved into a legal battle that redefined our community's governance. Each conversation reinforces the idea that our homes are more than just physical structures. They are reflections of our values and the spaces where we nurture our families, dreams, and identities. My journey has not only reshaped my living space but also recalibrated my outlook on life. The struggle with the HOA served as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting our personal freedoms. I now treasure every inch of my property, knowing that the right to modify it rests solely with me, a right I will never allow to be undermined again. And while the scars of the conflict may still be faintly visible in the form of sleepless nights and long-winded legal debates, they stand as badges of honor, a mark of a time when I chose to fight rather than yield. Looking back, I now understand that every challenge, no matter how trivial it might seem at first, has the potential to evolve into something much larger. What began as a dispute over a paint color turned into a transformative journey, one that reshaped not only a house but the very fabric of an entire neighborhood. I've learned that true empowerment lies in the courage to question authority, to speak out against injustice, and to insist on transparency and fairness in every facet of life. Every homeowner in our community now carries a quiet pride in knowing that we have each other's backs. Our stories, once individual and isolated, have woven together into a powerful tapestry, a tapestry that reminds us that our strength lies not in uniformity, but in the collective resolve to protect our rights. As I write these final reflections, I remain mindful of the unexpected turns life can take. What started with an unanticipated demand from someone named Karen became a watershed moment in my life. It's a reminder that everyday battles, whether fought on a front porch or in a courtroom, are the true tests of our character. While I had no desire to become embroiled in a neighborhood scandal when I first embarked on my renovation project, I now see that sometimes the cost of preserving one's freedoms is measured in challenges and conflicts. Yet, those very challenges lead to growth, unity, and a reaffirmation of what is truly important. I continue to live in my home with a sense of ownership that goes far beyond bricks and mortar. It's a deep-seated conviction that every individual has the right to define their own sanctuary without external interference. The journey wasn't easy, and there were moments when I doubted the possibility of a positive outcome. But in the end, our collective stand against arbitrary rules prevailed, and justice, in its own measured way, was served. Looking forward, I remain committed to advocating for fairness and transparency in all aspects of community living. I know that the road ahead will have its twists and turns, but armed with the lessons of the past, I feel equipped to face whatever challenges might arise. I encourage anyone who feels their rights are being trampled by overzealous authority to speak up, gather support, and never let anyone dictate how they must live their own life. My story, once a mere spark of defiance on a hot summer afternoon, has grown into a beacon of hope for many. Every brushstroke that adorns my home now symbolizes the triumph of personal freedom over oppressive mandates, a reminder that when we come together, even the most rigid systems can be transformed. Friends, thank you. See you soon.